What was it like growing up amongst killers in the Bonanno crime family? Let's check it out. I'm James Gladwish and welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today I'm joined by former mob associate Frank Fiordilino, and we discuss significant individuals and events from the history of the Bonanno crime family. Frank Fiordilino had two uncles in the Bonanno crime family, and various other relatives involved in organised crime. He grew up amongst the likes of Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato. He would enter a life of crime himself and was associated with Vito Guzzo Jr. and the infamous Giannini crew. Following a murder and murder conspiracy charge, he became a government witness in the early 2000s. He can be seen on the excellent YouTube channel 52 Topics with co-host Brett, which is well worth checking out. The link to this is in the comments below. So Frank, you were born in Sicily and you came here at a young age in around 1972, I believe. And I've
Correct.
heard you state before that you were kind of born into this life, basically. In fact, two of your uncles were with the Bonanno family. You had obviously your father's brother, Giovanni John Fiordilino, and it was your mother's brother, Frank Navarra. Can you tell us a little bit about these men and how influential they were with the Bonanno family?
Definitely. As far as like being born into it, I was born around it, so there was no escaping, and that was always the way we thought. Coming back from Italy, where kind of anti-authority and anti, so we kind of grew up in that kind of mold. And the older I got, I mean, not much older, I started gravitating, kind of that kind of frame of thought, how people think. But back to my uncles, they were a lot alike, but then they weren't a lot alike. They were the type, if they needed something from you, they made you feel like you were the world. Both of them had that trait. One was good with money, one was horrible with money. One was kind of like me, and I had another brother who just passed away, and my uncle was more like him. That my uncle Cheech was awesome. With that, he was a guy. He was a money guy, but he also carried two good characteristics in that life. He could kill you too. But my uncle John, he was rough. He was from my father's side of the family, and he was the youngest out of eight. And they grew up in the mountains of Castellamano del Golfo. So they were a little rougher type, rural, cattle thieving, livestock. There was two types of people in my town. There were the ones who from the town, ones from the sea, and then there was my uncle's side, my father's side, were more in American terms, Southern, cowboyish, Texans like. So that's how they were. They were different in that mold. My uncle dressed. I never seen him. My uncle Cheech, on the other hand, I've never seen him without a suit on or a tie ever. My uncle John was like he didn't dress sloppy, but it was what it was. You understand?
Yeah.
He could hang out with you guys one minute, and the next minute he's tossing on a bull up on the mountains. That's the type he was. More rural type, but that's the difference between them. But both of them, they could come off as lawyers sometimes. That's how they could, when they needed something. When they didn't need something to their bad side, they had a very ugly side to them as well.
Okay. And kind of how influential were they in the Bonanno family?
Well, one more in the '60s. My uncle John, he was under Di Gregorio, the captain that was in that war in the '60s that I've heard you cover before, and he was one of the protagonists during that time. Um, the tug of war of power at that time switched like 2 to 3 or 4 times. That at one point, and this is hearing it from my relatives, but especially on my dad's side, he had gotten into a couple of troubles. They would subpoenaed him a couple of times, and he just disappeared. He totally went to Italy, and I didn't see him again till like I guess I was 6 or 7 and in the States. So well, the first time really because I didn't remember him much. This is your father's brother, and he's been in Italy because it was like we came here and he went back there. You understand?
Okay.
But his brother-in-law, my aunt, his wife, her brother was Tony Giordano, and my grandmother's a Giordano, so my father's side. So we're cousins like twice. You understand? I know it sounds kind of West Virginian, as they would say in the States, but that Sicilians got that trait as well.
Okay, and so your Uncle John, I mean, apart from, obviously, Gaspar di Gregorio, which other mobsters was he close to in the Bonanno family?
He was close. I have another. My godfather was actually my first cousin as well. Is Giuseppe Pizzo. So he was like the younger brother to my father's six brothers. We kind of inherited him. The story goes his father, Joe Pizzo's father, and three of his uncles were cattle thieves, and they stole from the wrong people back in Castellamare del Golfo, and they annihilated the whole family. So being that my dad's side of the family, I got an uncle back in Italy that was a capo as well. My uncle Joe, who's actually Dino Calabro's grandfather. It's like 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Joe Pizzo's father gets killed. So the people want assurance that when he grows up, kind of like the Godfather, he's not going to take vengeance. So who's going to go to bat for him? So my dad and his brothers go to bat for him, and he's the oldest of our cousins. He just died a couple of years ago at 82 years old. I'm the youngest, and with that insurance, they kept him alive, or they would have when he got old enough, they would have killed him. Everybody, even his cousins, his first cousins, somebody had a vouch for them to keep them alive after they killed all his uncles and his dad. But anyway, he was here in the States. And he came here, immigrated, and that's who my Uncle John aligned himself with. Tony Aiello is another guy. Vito Licata, who his brothers later on get killed. Vito dies in 72, I think of March. He gets killed in a pool hall. They were that faction that were fighting the Bonanno faction. Remember, you hear about that Troutman Knickerbocker shootout?
Yeah.
That was that their faction right there against Bill Bonanno and Willie Ravello, who I get to know later in life. He goes, I knew your Uncle John a long time ago. I was there on Troutman when Bill got shot in the leg. I was like, Jesus Christ, you go that far? And he passed away not too long ago, maybe like 10, 15 years ago.
So did you know much about Frank Mari at all? Because obviously he was in that faction as well.
Matthew's dad, Matthew the lawyer's dad. No, he disappeared, and this was way before my time. But this was the 60s. I'm more familiar with the Bonanno War that came out after, which I was in my early teens, rather than that one in the 60s, which I wasn't even born, and everything is like reciprocated because I've heard it. I've heard it from people like Vito Guzzo Jr, who I was around. The times of what was going on. It wasn't always criminal with him. I used to spend hours sometimes with Vito talking about the old days. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was around Vito eventually, Grimaldi. So, they used to bring up those stories. And they were entertaining, sometimes boring. It was always the same thing. I had another friend of mine. We used to be there. We knew that stories by heart. We go, here he goes again, But out of love, though. Out of love.
So in 1979, Carmine Galante gets murdered. You'd have been about 9 years old at the time.
I was.
Is this one of your earliest memories about these kind of big things like that?
Of course, and it wasn't so much the actual event, but the people that were involved. I was close with Leonardo Coppola.
Yeah,
that was my father and Leonardo. They were sheep herders back as kids back in Sicily. So when he came to the States, I think we immigrated at the same time because Leonardo's older son and my older brother that passes away in 77 were really close. They played soccer together and all that here in the States, and they knew each other back home. So they were like family, and we used to go to his place. It's called, it's still there. It's called Leo and Sons on Broadway in Marcy. Leo being, and when he died, he was a really nice man to me. He was like a grandfather or an uncle. My dad was a lot older than me, so they were about the same age. So it came that, natural. And via that and what had happened, that's my connection and how close I was to what happened. Later on, I asked questions. 2 years later, I'm working down the block of my brother's coffee shop at 274 Knickerbocker. And the story is always just reciprocated. What happened, this and that, and then you get as you get older, you get a little bit at ease. The winks like, yeah, what do you think happened? And all that, and then nobody talks about homicide like that. You know how that works and that kind of life. But I remember it well. It was a hot day. It was July, and Uncle Nardo, that's what we called him. He died. You know, he died that day.
I mean, you hear a lot about Galante, and people say he was kind of mean and things like that. But obviously, your Uncle Leonardo Coppola, he was obviously close with the guy because he obviously was there dining with him when he died. I mean, what are your memories from the people that you knew? What did they think about Galante?
At the time, I was too young to even have that conversation. That conversation came after. It wasn't good. Whatever came out of after wasn't good. Things like, he was out of control. He had to be put down. He was a dog without a leash. I've heard stuff like that, which is a very common Sicilian comment. He wasn't missed. And then I would hear from people who knew him, like a Jackie DeRoss. He said, when I was walking down the street in Brooklyn, and me and Charlie, being his brother-in-law,
Charlie Moose?
Charlie Moose walking down the street, and Charlie Moose was crazy. He goes, "Come on, let's get the fuck out of here. This guy's nuts." So they just went the other way, They were
Charlie Moose Panarella was
they were like, "Let's get out of here." Well, I don't want to hear him, but he's gonna come up with some crazy shit. Or let's say if there was a pizza guy and he was getting his goods from somebody else, he'll walk in there and tell him, "Hey, listen, tomorrow I have a delivery for you. Don't go to that guy no more." And he would just leave it there. He was a bit of a bully and strong. I did that documentary where his daughter was in Angela, and she speaks of that was on National Geographic, and she speaks that they telling him, are you afraid they're going to kill you one day? And he says something, they wouldn't dare. That's what kind of attitude the guy had, and that's what kind of persona that was put out there that I kind of like grasped as I got older about him, and it's always the same thing, about how just a mental case he was, but he was a smart man, though.
Yeah,
he was a smart man. People talk his IQ and all that. I mean, he made a lot of connections all over the world.
So it's often said that Santo Giordano was the driver in the Galante hit, and he was also involved in the Three Captains hit as well, where he was hit by friendly fire, took a stray bullet, and was then paralyzed. If I'm aware, I mean, you knew the man well. And what are your memories of Santo Giordano?
He didn't come off as a gangster at all. Very smart, very friendly. Out of that whole group, if somebody was always welcoming when I was around, it was him, because we were like family as well. He was into skydiving at one time. He built he had a mechanic shop in Lower Ridge, what we call, which would be the cusp of where Bushwick is. And he was intelligent. He was very intelligent. He had Vito brought it up good one time. He goes, he had presidential qualities.
Okay.
To make you understand what type of person he was. I remember bringing him up with Ali Persico, which I was surprised he even knew him. And Ali didn't talk much about the mob. I was his cellmate in MDC for about a year and a half. And he said something to the effect like, things would have been a lot more different if he was still alive. So, people underestimate what kind of power he had in that family. They say Sal didn't talk the language, but one who was real liked among that Sicilian faction within the Americans and the Sicilian faction was definitely him. He was born in the United States. He went back to Italy with his dad at one time, and then he came back here. And what changed his life was like a Michael Corleone moment. There was over a parking spot, which is funny because he claimed when he got shot it was over a parking spot. But years before that, he had gotten into a tussle with a guy named Mike the Boxer, who was a little bit of a boozer, drug addict, and the guy punched him right in the eye, and that kind of like made him go crazy. A couple of months later, the guy was found in his basement apartment killed, and they say that was that his Michael Corleone moment, and he went from there. But yeah, I remember he was great. If I rode my bike and he would stop, he had an Eldorado. Go, where you going? I said, I'm just going home. He goes, hey, fucking, you live about 20 minutes away. What are you doing here? You're like 10 years old. You take the bike, put it in his car, drive me, give me $10, get the fuck out of here. That type of. But he was a really nice guy.
So obviously, I mean, he died in a plane crash in one of his planes. Even when he was paralyzed, he was still flying planes. If he hadn't died, and maybe if he hadn't been paralyzed, how far do you think he would have gone? Because obviously, he was obviously very respected by both, the Italians and the Italian Americans. Do you think he could have risen a lot further?
I don't know because he was dealing with a very, very possessive type of person in Joe Massino, but yet they didn't know that at the time. But I would say he definitely had boss qualities. I mean, and without 100%, could he have been the boss? That's what was talked about. He definitely would have been the boss.
Okay. So Giordano was obviously close with Cesare Bonventre and
Yes.
Baldo Amato.
Mhm.
Do you have any memories of Cesare at all?
Yeah, of course. See now where Tony used to live, and his mom. You see his mom. She's the one with the red hair and those Bono pictures.
Yeah, from the
The
wedding.
Bono pictures, not the Bono pictures.
Yeah.
That's my Aunt Maria. We used to go to the house all the time when relatives used to come from Italy. I remember Nino Buccellato came, and then that same year he went back to Italy, got killed in that '80s war, which is actually like a relative to Tony. He actually picked him up on his plane from near Canada to bring him to New York, and we used to be at the house, and they always were. Baldo was the playful guy. And Caesar was always the guy on the corner smoking a cigarette and laughing with everybody else's jokes. They would have people from the town would be there. It wasn't like any kind of mob meetings. It was a family surrounding more than what people want to hear. I think that's what it was. But
Go on.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting to hear you call him Caesar because obviously the Italian is obviously it was at Cesare, but
Yeah, we call him
it became Americanized and everyone just called him Caesar.
Well, that's what these people know. The Americans, and when they talk about people in the genre, they call him Caesar. We call him Jason. Ulongo, that means a tall guy.
Yeah.
Ubedo means a good-looking guy, and that's how they were categorized, both of them.
Because obviously he was known for his style, wasn't he? He had the open shirts and the
They all were.
sunglasses.
They all were. They weren't the type of cars I liked, but I didn't know years later these were expensive cars. They looked like little, the Peugeots and the little spiders, and like, yeah, that's how you're growing up. You want to see a Camaro, a Trans Am back then, but then later on, you're like, these are fucking expensive cars. The Maseratis, the Lancias were imported. My uncle Cheech imported a couple of Mercedes, and they're like, this car right here, he even had the German plates on them back in the day. Yeah, there was a lot of money in my neighborhood at one time.
So obviously Bonventre is killed in 1984.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of speculation. Some people say that I think it was Louis Haha Antanasio who shot him. Some people say that Massino pushed for this for him to be killed because potentially he saw him as a threat. There's another school of thought that says that Cesare Bonventre disrespected Rusty Rastelli in a meeting. I mean, what are your thoughts about why Bonventre was killed?
Well, his incentive was to be at the top again. I think if Rastelli was on the fence, Massino pushed him right over. Massino always says it was a Rastelli call.
Mm.
And a lot of it came out with the 302s. I was in jail with Pete Calabrese, who was also there. He on that murder, and in the ha guy. But it was like I think Vitali actually shot him. They fought over the steering wheel.
That's right. Yes.
They fought over the steering wheel. He was still alive when he shot him. And then he shot him again, and then they picked him up and put him in the trunk. If I remember, those 302. And then they stabbed Caesar again.
Yeah.
What was the motive to that? Apparently it was about Tony Aiello, and this is from either Sal Vitale's 302. Yeah, they were Sal Vitale, and I'll tell you why. Because when I read them, Joe hadn't flipped yet.
Yeah.
So these were Sal Vitale's, and I remember going to co-defendant meetings, and I'll tell you what Joe would say. But apparently, Tony felt that Caesar had his foot on his neck, for extorting him over the drug sales.
That's it. Yeah.
And somebody went to and I guarantee you, I don't know, this speculation. It was probably Tony the Indian who was the go-between, and knew Rastelli well, and knew Tony Aiello well that relayed that message, And he told him to stop. He told him, you're getting enough from the guy. Take it easy. And he told him something like, "This has nothing to do with you. Mind your business." And that didn't sit well. Now, Could have been talked about, yeah, whatever. I don't know how he went to that meeting by himself. He must have really, really been a little full of himself, Then
Yeah, definitely.
years later, then they found him in a drum in Garfield, New Jersey. But I don't know. That's what happened. But I remember years later at a co-defendant meeting, I'm with Joe, and he's throwing that out. Baldo's in the other floor. I'm not with him, but he's throwing out that Rastelli also wanted to kill Baldo, but he said no, he has nothing to do with this. Joe's trying to put it out there. I'm listening to it, thinking, well, if I run into Baldo, I'm gonna tell him, And with one eye looking at me and the other eye telling the story, because his brother-in-law is just babbling. It's probably pissing him off,
Yeah.
That happened. I didn't say anything. I cared, but I didn't. You know what I mean?
So another interesting, powerful Sicilian within the Bonannos I'd like to touch on, I don't know how much knowledge you have, is obviously Salvatore Catalano. I mean, how much do you know about him in terms of his kind of influence?
Not much in a criminal aspect, but I know of what I know. He was very tight with money. He had a bakery with all the money he was making, just hearing from friends of his later on, money that he would make in his drug business. He had a baker that he would pick up at 4 a.m. still, and made sure he had a ride to work because he didn't drive. So he was kind of like, I think, figuring that this run of his was never going to end, because I mean, if you're picking up your baker at 4 a.m, you're not living like, you're not going to see 80. And actually he did, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So
there's a lot of things. He was a money guy. He was a very good money guy. He had an import record store. I remember that on Knickerbocker Avenue. He was selling a lot of imports, Italian colognes, Italian records, Italian magazines, and little by little he climbed up the ladder.
So let's move to kind of your career, so to speak. We won't go into your kind of activities, but you came up in an era with some quite violent kind of what you call like street gangs, so to speak, like the Giannini crew.
Sure.
And you obviously know Vito Guzzo Jr. Vito Guzzo Jr.'s father, Vito Guzzo Sr., was a made man in the Colombos, who then disappeared and was murdered in '87, and I think it was allegedly by mobster Vinnie Unions. Guzzo Jr. waited several years until around 1992 before he tried to get revenge, and in an ambush, and Vinnie Unions luckily survived. What are your memories of that ambush? That was around '92.
Oh yeah, no, very well. It was Gazzardo. Gazzardo was like a mentor to Vito, so it was during his funeral where Vito apparently found out from Gazzardo who had killed his father, but while Gazzardo had cancer, and like real Hollywood-esque style, told him, "Hey, don't do this until I die, but I'm just telling you who it is." So when he died, he didn't wait. He didn't even wait a minute. The body was still cold, and it was the wake. And they waited on a block that's about 5-6 blocks away from the actual funeral parlor. It's Caldwell Avenue, and then the funeral parlor is actually on Elliott. It's maybe a block or two away, but 4 blocks the other way. So they waited. They knew that was like the only street to go down, and they ambushed the car, and they came out with rifles, guns, and just fired away. And there was 3 people in the car. The intended target, Unions, survives. There's another guy, Messi, in the car. He dies. They kill him.
Yeah.
But there's another guy that survives as well. But one guy ended up doing life over that. He took it to trial. That was Joe O'Kane. He was also there. And the other guys, there was another guy that ended up getting 22 years. And one of the kids that was there ended up cooperating and got a deal on it. But after they kill these guys, Vito goes home, dresses up, and goes to the funeral. Like, he had an alibi. So this is how calculated and cold and dangerous this guy was. But, at the end of the day, he was my friend,
Well, that's what I want to touch on now, because obviously there's a lot documented and spoken about how he was, and I think there's a story about him making a couple of people beg for their life before he killed them and things like that, and eventually gets sent away for like 38 years. I know you've spoken about him before. As you said, he was your friend. What was he like to you? What was your relationship with him then?
He was good. I mean, he was really good, very protective. You got to remember he's 5 years older. He was I think our friendship came out of us coming from similar backgrounds, mob wise. He grew up around that stuff. Obviously, his dad. I grew up around my uncle. Really liked him. My uncle Cheech, and the rest of my family. One day, when my dad died, Dino Calabro was at the funeral, and so is Vito. And Vito goes to Dino, "What are you doing?" I go, "That's my uncle." And he looks at me. He goes, "How many how many yous are there?" I go, "A lot." So that kind of shit. But so we kind of identify with each other on that level. But he was when I would do something crazy, he'd let me know. He wasn't yelling. He'd let me know. Like one time we're in a car wash together, and I think I just shot this one guy at the time. I don't think I know. And he looks at me. We're going through the car wash. He goes, Frankie, I'm crazy. People know I'm crazy. That I'm nuts. But you're a different kind of crazy. Like you do things fucking just because on the spur of the moment. Like, I don't, And I kind of felt offended. I'm like, this fucking guy is calling me crazy, and nobody even wants to be in nobody would want to be in that situation I'm in right now, going through a car wash, having this conversation with you, So, yeah, but I liked him. I did.
So this is pure speculation. It's just your opinion. He's been in there a long time. I mean, he had some kind of fracas inside. There was rumors that he was inducted into the Colombos while he was in prison. He's due to be out in a few years, allegedly. Do you think he will return to the life? I mean, again, it's just speculation.
I don't want to jinx him. I'm just gonna say I hope not, because I really actually like him. I didn't tell on him. My ex-friends did. I got arrested after. So
you hope he doesn't. You hope he stays away.
Hope not. I'll let your fan base decide that. Take a vote. I'm just gonna stay out of it.
So while you're on the streets in the 90s, I know you went on the lam for a bit into California. Obviously, Joe Massino revived the fortunes of the Bonanno family when taken over after Rastelli died in like 91. In your opinion, what attributes made Massino a successful boss?
The ones that demolished him, actually. In the beginning, it looked like a great plan. He was taking people with pedigree, kids with their fathers had money, and he was making the cowboy, and he was making the money guy, and he wanted to keep that. He wanted to keep anybody who was one day willing to go against him out of that kind of conversation. He was getting rid of the bad weeds. In '99, he kills Giorgio. Yeah. Anybody who was kind of like one day contest him, but he was taking I felt the money guys who are a weaker brand, but also a necessity in the mob. You need the money guys as well, and they're the ones who screwed him at the end.
What was your kind of relationship with kind of members of other families in the area? I mean, did people often talk about the Genovese? Obviously, I know you're kind of Queens, Brooklyn kind of based, but did people?
We were problem. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do people? As historians, we look at the Genovese and think, they're up there like this. Is that the kind of general feeling on the street?
Yes and no. I mean, in my neighborhood, two families coexisted together for a very long time, and they were both Sicilian factions. One was the Gambino, and then the other one was obviously the Bonanno family. I would say, in numbers, in this side of the North Brooklyn and Ridgewood, we were the majority. Where in Brooklyn, they were the majority. The Gambino family, like 18th Avenue, Bensonhurst. So that's the only two that really mattered to me. That until this whole Gotti mania came around, the only mob I knew was the mob I just articulated to you. But back to the Genovese family, there was a Genovese club. Fritzy Giovanelli lived in also worked out at Ridgewood, and he had a club in Ridgewood. So they were a small group compared to the other two groups that I grew up around. So I don't know. I didn't consider them big because I didn't know better. Big was the people I knew.
Yeah.
Until they disappeared, and then it was like this John Gotti thing that exploded.
I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.